Hello everyone. I think we'll get it started. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Carl Huang. I'm taking over from Katie as the director for CPAC. I'm still learning my role. Obviously new to the role, and it's a nice way to start, of course, to welcome you to the first seminar, AK seminar for the year. And I'll hand over to Amy to introduce our speaker.
Hello. I think I probably need to speak into this for the people online, which is an interesting look, isn't it? So I would like to acknowledge that we're meeting here today on Wajak Noongar Boodja. Always was, always will be. Sovereignty was never ceded, and we are keeping in mind that this is a difficult time of the year for our First Nations friends and colleagues. And I just wanted to start by acknowledging that this has long been a place of learning, teaching, and knowledge production and fruitful discussions like the ones that we're hopefully about to have. So I'm going to introduce Ros, and I've got quite a few notes here that I had to really whittle down because Ros is a professor of inequalities in media, culture and creative industries at Goldsmiths, the University of London, and is the author of several books, including Gender and the Media, Aesthetic Labour, Mediated Intimacies and Confidence Culture, all with a vast array of wonderful co-authors. And Ros is presenting to us today from her recent research on young people's experiences of social media, from which you've published the book Feeling Judged on Social Media. Ros's academic and research practice is interdisciplinary and spans the areas of gender studies, sociology, social psychology, and more really. And she's done, made significant contributions across these interdisciplinary areas around post-feminist media cultures and the gendered analysis of media and culture, as well as neoliberalism and the persistence of social inequalities, the changing nature of work and labour in creative industries and academia, and also research methods and cultures, among other things that I could probably note there as well. Ros's work, I'm really pleased to have Ros here with us at Curtin, because her work has been really influential in my own thinking about contemporary gender politics and the relationship between media and culture and subjectification processes and internalisation processes. And I feel really lucky that we're actually working together on a couple of projects at the moment that have brought Ros to this part of the world around selfie editing and also young people's understanding of Me Too and sexual harassment media content. So it was I was actually looking at my kind of academic genealogy of key thinkers and papers yesterday and trying to get my head around the workshop material for this afternoon, and realising that it was your paper from 2003 about the shift from sexual objectification to subjectification that was the first paper of yours that really kind of caught my attention and made me go, wow, that's exactly what I'm seeing in analysing young people's social media practices and media and culture, and really was very helpful in articulating what was going on at the time. And it's really ever since then, over the years, that I feel like Ros has really got this uncanny ability to kind of have her finger on the pulse of what's going on in media and culture amidst and tracking and articulating really subtly shifting discourses of power in contemporary media cultures. So that's what I appreciate about Ros's scholarship. And I also just wanted to say she's very generous with her time and support of junior scholars and mentorship and careful attention to people's work and to citational practices and that kind of thing that I really appreciate, and consider Ros a very generous source of wisdom and support for me, as well as for a lot of other scholars in Australia and around the world. So we're very grateful to have her here with us today. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Rosalind. Thanks for such a really like full and warm and generous introduction. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I'm really happy. And I'd like to also especially thank Linda for all the work that she's been doing behind the scenes. And right now, actually, in sorting out all the tech, just making this happen. And on that note, I hope you'll give me feedback if this, that make sure that the microphone is working okay online and everything. So without further ado, I'm going to be talking about my most recent work, which is about young people's experiences on social media. It was designed to be kind of broader than that, and I titled the project Life on My Phone. And I was interested in the apps that they used and generally how they use their phones in everyday life. But then what happened when I started doing the interviews was that everybody wanted to talk about social media and everybody wanted to talk about their self-presentational practices on social media and how troubling it is to do something as seemingly simple as post a picture of yourself online. And so I'm going to kind of focus in on that today. And as Amy said, it's come from this book, which came out in September 2023, and really reflecting on what it means to live in such a hyper visual culture as the one that we're living in. So I garnered some figures from a really useful website called Photo Tutorial, which estimated that 1.93 trillion photographs were taken last year. That's around 61,000 every second, and that 15 billion new images are uploaded online every day. This figure, 1.3 billion photographs shared daily on Instagram alone, I think that feels like a little bit of an underestimate in the context of how many images. But I think the general point is that we're living in a historically unprecedented moment, that, you know, we've all grown up in media cultures of one kind or another. But when I was a student, one of the common things that lecturers used to do in our classes, for example, on advertising, would be that they would say, the average person encounters around 500 advertising images in a day. Well, I mean, you couldn't do that today, or if you did, those figures would just be you know, mind-bendingly higher and almost kind of unimaginable, or almost kind of difficult to just get your head around. And what I'm really arguing overall is that I don't feel that research about this hypervisual culture that we're living in has kept up with how fast things have changed. And I think that whilst we've got some really interesting research about exposure to influencers and influencers' experiences on social media, I think there's much less research about just regular everyday people living their lives and how they actually engage with that and what it means to live in such a visually mediated society. So these are the questions that I've been trying to address. So how do people navigate these mediated environments characterized by unprecedented proliferation of images? Many of them are produced and shared by ordinary users. How do relations of power and inequality shape experiences of participation in visual culture? And how do ordinary people negotiate the imperatives that are all around us to be visible, put yourself out there, broadcast yourself? And that's really what I'm trying to address. And what I want to argue is that one of the strongest motifs of my research has been about the desire to be seen by the young people that I interviewed. They really wanted to be seen, to be recognized, to be affirmed. And I think this is a profoundly human aspiration, just to have yourself recognized in the world as a person. And there was a great desire to be seen, but then to make oneself visible, to post those pictures, to engage in the kind of discourse around posting pictures of oneself with one's friends, with one's family, with one's pets in the environment was actually a really, really complicated and fraught project for them. So they talked about the impossibility of normative appearance standards and living up to them. Quite a lot of talk about feeling invisible, structurally invisible, or being visible but in an unequal world. And then they talked about the difficult feelings around being seen, but also feeling watched and feeling like you're under surveillance. Maybe you're being trolled, maybe you're aware of all the cameras that are all around you when you go for a night out. Maybe you're receiving harassment from others or even cruelties from friends. And I was really struck by the connection between feeling watched and feeling judged, and how quickly and powerfully those two resonated. And again, on this subject of seeing, I think I'm particularly interested in the way that our actual ways of seeing are changing and co-evolving with social media technologies, and how we're just becoming much more forensic in our gaze at ourselves and each other. So that's a sort of broad overview of some of the things I want to talk about. So just to say very, very briefly, the principles that I tried to work by in this project were around listening, first and foremost. I went to a research workshop recently, which was about creative methods, and I felt like I was the least creative person in the room. Everybody was doing like really interesting and sophisticated methods of tracking people on their phones, listening to them talk whilst they edited their photographs, doing incredibly interesting and creative things. And I was basically just doing that good old listening to people. I didn't look at their social media feeds, and I felt it was important ethically not to, because I just wanted to hear about their experiences. So I wasn't there to judge or evaluate or compare what they said with what they posted or anything like that. Just wanted to hear from them. So listening, very crucial, and trying to build in young people's own perspectives, and was lucky enough to have 2 young people as consultants on the project who were enormously helpful in making me aware of my own blind spots. So one of those blind spots was that in designing the survey that I initially used in the research, I thought that I would, ask people to break down the kind of categories of use that they went on social media for. So following influencers, following activists, following friends, posting yourself, and immediately gave this to the young people, and they said, "Where's random browsing?" It's like, yes. Yeah, and that turned out to be the most salient activity, particularly as I carried out the research just as TikTok was really kind of becoming popular. And random browsing was what it was all about. It was just about being on your phone, going to look at something, and then just kind of being sucked in, and suddenly hours have passed and you've looked at so many things. And that was a really striking feature of the interviews, that when I asked people what they looked at, there was quite often a sense of almost like head scratching and perplexedness, like, I don't really know. I mean, I started off just looking at this, but then, I looked at all these other things. The other thing was about asking open questions, which again was feedback from the young participants. And I think that I'd intended not to have open questions in the survey, because I thought, it would ask too much of people, and who has time to be like writing out long answers or typing in long answers. But actually was absolutely astonished by how much people had to say. They really wanted to contribute. They didn't want their responses to be limited to kind of tick boxes. And then in the interviews, very much allowing the young people to shape the direction that I went in. So I had of course, an informal interview structure. I had a series of questions that I wanted to get through, as we all would, but where they went, I followed. So I was just opening to see where they took me, and then also at the end of every interview, asking them, are there topics that you feel like you would have liked to discuss that we haven't covered? And it was really nice that several people felt able to use that space and say, well, yes, actually, there were, and like then bring up their own topics. And I really wanted to work intersectionally. I know we're going to be talking more about this later, so I'll say less about that, but it was extremely important to me to have as diverse a group of participants as possible. So not representative, but very, very diverse. So the participants were aged 18 to 28, but they were very skewed to the younger age. There were a couple of 27 and 28-year-olds, but most people were in their early 20s. There was mostly women, but some men and some people who identified beyond or outside the gender binary. There were very diverse backgrounds and heritages represented. So compared with the census, which came out in 2021, minority ethnic groups were overrepresented in this research compared with the general population. Range of different sexual identifications, and also diverse in relation to class and disability, and also mental and physical health. And many participants reported some form of neurodivergence and mental health struggles. That's a whole other discussion. Finally, I should say they were also very diverse in their social media practices. So in the end, I had around 35 participants. I'm saying around 35 interviewees because actually there were a couple of people that I interviewed twice, and there were some people who took part in the interview but specifically wanted to focus around one set of issues and didn't complete the full interview. So that's why I've sort of hedged it by saying around 35. Not trying to be evasive, there's a good reason for it. But amongst those 35 people, very diverse in relation to their social media practices. So at one end of the continuum, I had 3 people who were in the kind of micro-influencer category. I wasn't soliciting influencers, it's just that they were ordinary users who had often just by accident become phenomenally popular and suddenly found that they had huge numbers of followers on their accounts. So one of them was a student. She'd been posting a lot when she was at university. She and her friends were posting onto their grid, and they were spotted by a couple of fashion brands who said, oh, we'll send you clothes that you can wear on your nights out. And it kind of went from there. And yeah, it was almost a sort of serendipitous process. She didn't sort of set out to be an influencer. I had another micro-influencer who was a modest fashion influencer. And so she was a Muslim woman who wore a hijab, and she posted pictures of herself without showing her identity, and that was very interesting. She chose not to show her face, and she would either use her veil to slightly obscure her face, or she would pose herself so that her face wasn't visible, or just turn away. Or anyway, she had, I think, 85,000 followers for her modest fashion posts. At the other end of the spectrum, I had 3 people who, whilst they were on social media, they didn't post themselves on social media. So they were on it as much as everybody else, scrolling, looking through, seeing what was happening, but they didn't identify themselves. So one told me that she just has a sort of sequence of random numbers for her Instagram account. And it just allowed her to participate, but not be seen. So diverse participants, these are some of the occupations of the interviews, as you would imagine, lots of students in that age group, also lots of people starting professional careers or starting retail or hospitality careers. So wanting to be seen, to come to this central point, this was really, really striking to me that such a strong motivation for being on social media was wanting to be seen by others, wanting to be recognised, wanting, as Elizabeth puts it, to have this feeling that even though she was in lockdown, she wasn't actually seeing her friends in person, they could still see her because they could see her photos. Generally, people talked about they wanting to belong, be part of a community, be part of a flow, have people affirming them, liking their photos, leaving nice comments, just feeling connected to others. But often they felt invisible, and this really, like, I can't say correlated given the numbers. I don't have the numbers in this research to make any kinds of claims about correlation, but there seemed to me to be a really strong connection to various forms of marginality and oppression and feeling invisible. So just talking about media generally, one woman said that she was Sri Lankan British and hadn't heard of any similar characters throughout her life, even on legacy media, even in TV shows. Someone else saying, finding it very difficult to relate as very few South Asian women are represented positively in the media. Amongst my disabled participants, there was a very, very strong feeling that disabled women are invisible. And one woman talking very, very powerfully about how she could go onto sites or support groups online that were around the condition that she suffered from, and see representations of people like her there. But if she was just on kind of Explore or For You and just getting content coming in, she would never see anyone experiencing disability. And she talked about that in relation to her own practices. And then queer, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, different sexual orientations, also saying that they just don't see those representations. And binary gender roles and their portrayals are so widespread that non-binary participants often felt that people were trying to find out what their gender was and identify them as one or another, but didn't see themselves represented, again, outside sort of specific trans supportive sites. And this could operate through just the visual images that they encountered, but it also operated algorithmically. So Tanisha was really interested in the clean girl makeup trend, but she said that as a Black woman, she just didn't find other creators who looked like her unless she specifically typed clean girl makeup, Black girl, because the default images were all white. And so this was another form of kind of algorithmically driven invisibility. This was very painful around disability and disabled women describing themselves as invisible and hidden. And non-binary people, as I've already mentioned, feeling that they were unreadable to others, and that their very existence was questioned, or that they were seen as sad or dangerous. Another difficulty that many people talked about was just how impossible it is to live up to perfect images. So these are just some of the quotes that there could be thousands others to replace these. It was such a widely talked about issue. So I don't look like that. I'll never look like that. I see all these perfect bodies in bikinis. It makes me feel really low. We're constantly being told we're not thin enough, not pretty enough, too many spots, not enough boob, not enough bum, too big a thighs. It goes on. And other people saying that they felt ashamed, overwhelmed, constantly felt like they were a failure. And I think something that I put in purple to accentuate it on this slide is that I think, you know, in feminist media studies and in media and cultural studies generally, for decades, we've been looking at issues about the representation of women and questions about body image. And I think sometimes it can seem as if it's a really trivial issue, but I really want to emphasize that it isn't. It's not trivial, but it's not a pathology on the part of the women that experience it. And it's not something that they just engage with passively. They're very, very aware of it. They're orientating to it all the time. It's something that's absolutely central to your everyday experience as a young woman. So just a couple of quotes to illustrate this. So Elizabeth, junior doctor working in a major hospital in the north of England at the height of COVID. So she had a few things going on in her life, but she said, I don't want to see these perfect people. It just makes me feel rubbish. And I know if I see too many images, it makes me question myself. It's probably the single biggest thing that makes me miserable. And that single biggest thing that makes me miserable really, really stood out to me. And then India, who was an animal welfare officer, saying, it's all too perfect again, skin condition, all these adverts of perfect skin, perfect eyebrows, all that kind of thing. If you're not looking like that, you just think, why don't I look like that? How do they even look like that? They all look amazing and I don't look like that. I hope this conveys some of the pain of this. And then the kinds of additional factors that come into play when you're being visible in a world where you've been structurally invisibilized or disappeared. So Aisha was a Muslim participant. Parents had come to the UK from Somalia, and she'd been brought up in London. She'd lived her whole life in London, and she talked about how she was allowed to go on Instagram only quite late, and she felt like she was the last girl in her class at school to get Instagram because her parents didn't want her to go on to social media. And then she talks about how she'd really wanted to, and in the end she got her sister to set up an account for her so she could kind of go onto Instagram without her parents knowing. And then she, experienced what she describes as huge insecurities because everyone was trying to make themselves look like people on social media. I felt like there weren't a lot of people on social media that looked like me. I struggled with that. I had really deep insecurity issues, and especially because I went to a girls' school for 5 years, and that kind of environment was very much like heavy on social media and looking a certain way. Perfect skin, perfect hair, the perfect body. And I remember there was a trend of having thick eyebrows and thick lips as well. People would make comments all the time. I felt a huge pressure to look a certain way. And Katie, who was a wheelchair user, talked about how she felt that if she posted a picture of herself, she had to compensate for her wheelchair. She had to somehow look even better if she was posting with her wheelchair or with her crutches. And then she talked about how ultimately she just decided that she wouldn't post a picture of herself using her wheelchair or her crutches. And she talked about how she used editing software to just like edit them out of her photos, because she got too much negative feedback when she posted, with people saying, oh, you're attention seeking, really horrible comments. So surveillance was a really big issue, as I mentioned at the beginning. So moving from invisibility to the opposite, in a way, to feeling watched all the time and feeling like you're under surveillance. And of course, women's bodies have always been under surveillance. They've always been the bodies that have been on display in the media. But social media is really intensifying this. And the young women in the study report feeling watched across all aspects of their lives. So in public transport, when they go out to bars, clubs, in the street, and the feeling of not just being watched, but of being scrutinized. They talked about some issues to do with camera culture, and how when they go out at night, they all have their group of friends with them. They have their own kind of friends code, which they deploy about how they'll take the photo. So they'll take the group photo at the start of the night, and they'll probably have to do maybe 40, 50 photos before everyone in the group feels okay about that photo and it can be posted. But that is a very cooperative, collective process that everyone's involved in, and they're leaning over each other's shoulders or passing the phones around and going, well, you look great in that, but I don't like how my arm looks, or whatever, in that photo. That could be a very community orientated process. But then they talked about, once those photos were posted, you were then subject to the general kind of undifferentiated gaze of everybody that was in that space, because so many people had their cameras out all the time and were just filming things. And so there was a huge amount of talk about being watched. And I'll just skip forward to this one, actually, because because Emma says it's a bit stressful, because if you go out, you have to think everyone's recording everything. You have to think you can't let your guard down as much, because you could see it again on someone's Snapchat or whatever. So you don't want to do anything embarrassing. I'm thinking of, on a night out, you definitely see people, like women, looking really worried about how they look. It's 2 a.m. No one looks nice, but people are always taking photos. You can't really let your guard down. And Lisa just put it so pithily when she said, it's like having a TV crew with you every time you go to a pub or a club. And other people talked about how they're walking to the bathroom, wherever they are, sucking their tummy in and wondering whose stories they're going to end up on. But generally, just a sense of feeling under surveillance. So this was Helena, who's a teacher in London, and she talks about, I've always felt surveilled. Is that a word? As a woman, just even walking around London or anywhere, that's one of the reasons I didn't get social media, and why I definitely don't post pictures of myself. That was a very active choice of mine, and I make conscious decisions on how I present myself to make sure that doesn't happen. Letitia, again, saying this in a jokey way, but very much talking about the feeling of being stared at. I'm not the most camera confident, so usually if I'm out and I see a camera, I'll usually run. She's joking, but there's a real core of truth in that joke. And Holly, who was one of the influencers, talking about when she's out photographing herself with the clothes that she's been sent by the fashion companies. And she's often dragging her mum along to do the photo shoot with her. She's researching it endlessly. She's thinking about what would be a good background, what would be an interesting background for this photo shoot. She's thinking about it really professionally. And then she's talking about how she's being stared at while she's being photographed. I hear people say, what is she doing? And it's really funny because you go out and you're taking photos and people just stare. I don't know why. Some people just walk past, but then other people literally stare at you like you're doing something you shouldn't be doing. And Pravina talking about being a hijabi is already quite hard as we become a visible representation of Islam. So when people stare, my first thought is, why are they staring at me? And when the stare is longer than necessary, I start to wonder what may they have seen in the media, what they think about me and Islam overall. Being stared at makes me feel very uncomfortable. One thing that was really striking to me was that how experiences that weren't their own direct experiences could also have a really powerful impact on young women. So one of the things that several people talked about very passionately was how upset they feel when they see other celebrities or other people in public life being trolled or receiving lots and lots of negative comments online. So one example was Adele. So just in the period before I did the interviews, Adele had recently undergone that significant amount of weight loss. And there was very much a sense that her body was kind of public property, and people were commenting on it from all kinds of different perspectives, some positive, some negative, some, you know, a real mixture. Participants were talking about just how uncomfortable they felt reading these kinds of comments about Adele and how they could so easily apply to themselves. There was kind of an empathetic response. And this participant, Lynn, was talking about that this woman pictured below, who is Molly May, who was a contestant on a UK Love Island, and again came in for loads and loads of criticism at one point while she was still on the island. And she talks about how she was so upset to see this criticism of a girl who was really actually just a few months older than her. And she was saying, I just don't know how she would survive it. It would just be unbearable. I couldn't bear for something like that to happen to me. And so in this really quite sweet extract, she talks about how she and her sister decided that they would get together and they would message Molly May and just kind of try and give her a little boost and just say, you know, not everybody is that mean. Just talked about how most of the accounts that she follows that have more than 10,000 followers do get comments like that, lots and lots of negative comments. And Tanisha, who we'd met earlier talking about the clean girl makeup trend, also talked about the chilling effect that seeing negative comments directed at other Black women who are maybe more celebrities than she is, how chilling that is for her. She says, I'm sure that people who have a lot of followers don't even have time to look at all the comments, but just the fact that people can post things like that and it's there. So if a regular user like me is just scrolling through the comments and I can see that, it's a lot. It's a lot. I just said, that's just so horrible. What kind of effect does it have on you seeing that? And she said, it makes me feel really scared and angry. I feel like a lot of people wouldn't say those things in real life, but people feel really emboldened behind the screen or behind the keyboard. I think one of the things I found very troubling in the research and quite unexpected was that that sometimes these negative comments could actually be coming from the young women's friends. So it wasn't all just strangers leaving nasty comments or uploading your image to a troll site. It was actually your own groups of friends that were doing that. So Lynn gave, and again, Lynn was such an articulate participant, gave a really vivid example about someone, about groups of friends basically screenshotting something that you've posted and then dissecting it in a private Snapchat group. So she said someone might Snapchat you or message you about what they've posted saying, oh, why did you post this, that? Don't you think that's a bit revealing? Don't you think you look too this or too that? And then you might feel a bit outside. But if you're in a friendship group, especially with girls, they're probably not going to put it on social media because they don't want everyone else to see it. So it's more behind closed doors, but it's the same kind of comments, I think. And I asked for an example and she says, well, I don't know if I can say it, but you know, like those girls I mentioned, we'd all be in group chats and they'd send screenshots of other people's profiles into the chat and be like, oh my God, this is definitely edited, or look at her legs, or look at how this she looks. Or they'd send you yours and be like, oh really, you're going to post this? And you'd have to send what you were going to post for them to be like, no, you shouldn't post that, you should do this. It's definitely more small friendship groups just commenting on each other. Coming towards the end now, but I wanted to make a point about what this looking is like, that how it's changed. So it's a very, very forensic form of looking that really is enabled by the kind of magnification features of smartphones that allow us all to just zoom in. And so people were hyper aware of the kind of scrutiny that they were going to be under whenever they posted something. So Bianca, 18-year-old, young Black woman, she was a nail technician, and she talked about, with Instagram, I always edit my pictures. With Instagram, it's a thing where people can zoom in on the picture and look at something. Oh, she's got a bit of a spot on her head. She hasn't done her eyebrows properly. She hasn't done her makeup properly, or her room's a bit messy. It's just everything. The picture has to be perfect. If there's something random in the background, you've got to edit that out or just not post the picture at all. I also use Facetune, so it gets rid of my blemish on my face that I have had for years. And I will not post a picture without. On Instagram, it's always a makeup picture, always. It's never just a normal picture or whatever. And Lily, I call her my Foucauldian expert because she has such an incisive analysis. She says, because I've watched a lot of people doing eyeshadow and whatnot, so then now, because I've watched so many videos of people doing their eyeshadow, I've realized I've got quite small eyes and that I've got hooded eyelids. So now I have a problem with my eyelids because I've watched so many videos of people doing their makeup. She was completely aware of where this had come from. But she was very much trapped within it. And I am so interested in this kind of trend towards more forensic ways of looking, particularly at the face, but really at the whole body. And always talk about the difference between how young women see and how I see. So I realized that very much brought home to me while doing this research that the world's a bit of a blur to me, really, not because I have particularly poor eyesight, but just because I don't have that kind of, haven't been trained in that forensic style of looking. And so it's like, you all look lovely. And, you know, I have a kind of blurred look. I have a kind of benign gaze on the world. I'm just like generally thinking that, you know, seeing the best through these eyes.
What do you mean? No, it hasn't been done. Splice isn't done properly down here.
Anyway, the young women I interviewed could see this about me, and they said, you might not see it, but they will, talking about their own photos. And my favorite quote of all really is Eve saying, "You're like my mum." She just sees a picture of me and says, "That's nice, Eve is smiling. You don't really see." And Sophia was super interesting because she talked about how she felt that had changed over the course of the time that she'd been using social media. She described herself as, "I'm like the grandma of TikTok because I'm 25. I'm so old," but there's crazy amounts of specificity in the way that people talk about and zoom in on and demonstrate makeup techniques on their face. So I really think that this is such an interesting area of future research. I did mention that feeling watched is closely related to feeling judged, and there were so many ways of getting things wrong, posting a picture that's not perfect enough, posting a picture that's too perfect, posting a picture that doesn't get enough likes or that gets nasty comments, posting a picture that looks fake, being judged to have tried too hard or care too much, posting too little, using the wrong tone, not having quite the right humorous, self-deprecating tone in your caption, seeming to be vain, not being positive enough, being called attention-seeking. And again, 2 participants just saying how worried they feel when they're posting. Lisa saying, "When I do post stuff, I normally send it to some of my friends and you'd be like, 'Do you think this is okay to post?' and stuff like that, because yes, it's out there for everyone to see. It just makes me a bit anxious." And India saying, "Honestly, it's awful. Every single thing anyone does is judged. I'm having anxiety anyway. It just makes things so much worse. I'm anxious about every single thing I do now." She talks about how even if you're just being yourself and everyone's all for being yourself, you're still going to be judged anyway. So I think this is my last slide. Yes, it is. So just really interested in the desire to be seen, but all of the difficulties that that then generates in terms of not being seen, feeling invisible, being visible, but in a very unequal world, feeling watched, stared at, surveilled. And it makes me think back to a long body of work in feminist media studies about the gaze. So we've had a lot of research about the male gaze. We've got research about the colonial gaze, about white gazes, about heteronormative gazes. And it's made me think that there isn't a singular gaze, that actually what the participants were talking about was how they feel that they're subject to multiple gazes. And there can be the gazes of their friends, of, potentially hostile others, of people that are trying to hit on them sexually, of, future employers. I mean, just multiple gazes that they feel subject to. And the response that they have to all these difficulties around addressing these potential gazes and posting something that they feel okay with is labour. So just working incredibly hard on their aesthetic labour through their posing and taking and editing of their photos, through their relational, intimate labour with their groups of friends, and all the things that can go wrong if you accidentally don't like one friend's picture when you've liked another friend's, and all of these sort of like quite fraught fields of microaggression, and all the emotional and affective labour. So it's really hard work. So wanting to be seen, but visibility is hard work and challenging. So that's it.